How could it be that one of the most experienced drivers in the paddock felt like he was losing total control of the car, while the technical data said that everything was in order? And why did Ferrari decide to ignore a design problem that they knew would explode in races like Singapore? Lewis Hamilton is not just any driver. He is the man who has challenged eras, cars, and generations. And yet, when he arrived in Singapore behind the wheel of the SF25, something in him changed. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a doubt. It was bewilderment. The disconnection between his hands, his instinct, his experience, and what the car was transmitting to him was total. During the first laps, as the race unfolded under the lights of Marina Bay, Hamilton began to sense something that he couldn't explain in exact words, but that he felt with an intensity that no data could measure. The car behaved erratically, as if each curve were a roulette wheel, as if each braking became a leap into the void. From the cabin, it reported loss of stability in the rear. He said that the axle was not responding, that the car moved as if it were floating. But on the pit wall, in front of dozens of telemetry screens, the engineers saw a different story. The graphics, the sensors, the algorithms, everything showed a car that behaved completely stable. There were no strange lockups, no out-of-range temperature spikes, and no signs of extreme oversteer or understeer. Nothing. Everything technically was fine. That disconnect between what the driver felt and what the data showed was the starting point of something much bigger than a simple bad race. It was evidence that there was a deep, silent, structural failure that was masking its symptoms. For a driver like Hamilton, who has lived off his sensitivity, his reading of the track, his almost visceral relationship with the machine, this experience was not only frustrating, it was humiliating. It's as if the car is lying to you, as if the SF25 was programmed to look perfect, while breaking down inside. In the box, the atmosphere became tense. The engineers were faced with an impossible paradox: how to explain that a driver with 17 years of experience felt an unmanageable car, while the computers said that everything was under control. And the most disturbing thing was that it was not the first time it had happened. Similar comments had already been detected in other practice sessions, although they had always been attributed to external factors such as weather, setup, or even driving style. But in Singapore, none of that applied. The clue was known. Conditions were under control. Hamilton was not improvising. He was describing a problem that didn't appear on any screen, but could be felt with the body. The body of a driver who knows when a car is about to fail. And that's what the SF25 was doing. Failing inside, leaving no trace on the surface. This was the first chapter of a story where reality and perception clashed. A car that seemed technically perfect, but that hid a much more dangerous truth. That even in the era of artificial intelligence, advanced simulation, and precision engineering, the human factor remains irreplaceable. Because if the best driver of his generation tells you that something is wrong, and you decide to ignore it because the software says otherwise, you have lost your way. What began as an intuition from Hamilton's cockpit ended up being revealed as a structural failure that was already known, but was ignored. In modern Formula One, teams rack up thousands of hours of simulation before a car even hits the road. And in those simulations, carried out from Maranello months before the season began, Ferrari engineers had already detected a pattern of anomalous behavior in the SF25's braking system. It was not a specific error, nor a simple misreading of data. It was a fundamental design problem. The car's chassis was not properly adapted to dissipate the heat generated by the braking system, especially in urban scenarios with high thermal demands. Internal simulations showed that in circuits like Singapore, where track temperatures exceed 40 degrees and ventilation is minimal, the SF25 entered a spiral of progressive thermal stress. Each lap accumulated heat. Each stint raised the internal temperature of the brake discs beyond the optimal threshold. And the worst part, the car's aerodynamic system, designed to maintain a high level of load in slow corners, was not equipped with cooling ducts efficient enough to release that heat energy. This situation generated a domino effect that compromised the entire integrity of the braking system. Overheated discs altered the behavior of the brake pedal. The hydraulic pressure varied. The driver lost confidence because the initial bite of the brakes was no longer the same, corner after corner. In a category where braking from 300 to 70 kilometers per hour takes just 2 seconds, that changes a sentence. But the most controversial decision was not technical. It was political. Because despite knowing that this vulnerability existed, Ferrari chose not to redesign the system. An engineer, whose identity remains confidential, explained it unambiguously: "We knew that the design had limitations from the simulations in Maranello, but there was no will to make structural changes before the start of the season." Why was that decision made? because modifying the design of the chassis or the cooling system before approvals meant delays, new impact tests, restructuring the distribution of aerodynamic flow and risking the development window of the SF-25 in general. The team opted to press ahead, convinced they could make up the shortfall with thermal management and configuration adjustments for each circuit. They bet that the problem would not explode in the race. They literally bet against time. And they lost. The technical audit carried out after the Singapore GP confirmed the worst-case scenario. The ruling was not a surprise. It was the visible manifestation of an error already documented and that was allowed to pass by deliberate decision. The brake system did not collapse due to a breakdown. He collapsed because he was never prepared for that environment. And that is the difference between an unexpected error and technical negligence. In practical terms, the analysis of Hamilton's stints revealed that the temperature of the front discs increased in each stint, with no possibility of recovery, even during the lift and coast laps. This means that even reducing the pace to the minimum possible, the car was not able to stabilize its operating temperature. The brakes were literally at boiling point. And when lap 60 arrived, Hamilton simply lost control. "I've lost my brakes. I lost my left front." When the data confirmed that Hamilton's brake failure in Singapore was not an isolated accident, but the direct consequence of a chain of ignored decisions within Ferrari, the team entered a phase of internal turbulence from which it has not yet emerged. What began as a technical suspicion quickly transformed into a silent struggle between departments, between management philosophies, between those who wanted to take responsibility, and those who preferred to hide behind the graphs. The technical meetings after the GP were not routine. They were tense. Loaded with veiled reproaches, uncomfortable silences, exchanges that did not appear in the official reports. The engineers in the simulation area accused the aerodynamic department of not having anticipated the extreme temperature conditions. The design team argued that the overall efficiency of the car had been prioritized, not thermal exceptions. Those responsible for strategy claimed that they trusted the data presented to them. And Maranello's senior officials, instead of cutting off the discussion with a clear guideline, opted for the most comfortable position, avoiding structural decisions and buying time. In the midst of this internal chaos, Hamilton was isolated. Not because he was explicitly marginalized, but because what he represented was uncomfortable for everyone. His experience, his ability to accurately detect failures, his track record of success, turned his criticism into a direct threat to the team's narrative. He was not a rookie complaining about lack of adaptation. He was a 7-time world champion demanding answers. And I wasn't receiving them. During the post-race feedback sessions, Hamilton was direct. He asked why the system had not been redesigned. He asked why he was not heard in previous sessions, when he had already reported similar symptoms. And he asked, above all, if he could trust the team to make the necessary changes to prevent this from happening again. The answers, according to internal sources, were evasive. Phrases such as, "We are analyzing options," or "We are prioritizing stability in development" were repeated. But for a driver of his caliber, those are not answers. They are excuses. And that lack of clarity began to slowly erode Hamilton's confidence in the Ferrari structure. A confidence that was already weakened by the unfulfilled promises of the preseason, where he was guaranteed that he would have a car capable of fighting for the championship from the first race. Instead, he had to contend with a car that was not only technically vulnerable, but managed by a divided team, more concerned with protecting its internal reputation than learning from its mistakes. Lewis Hamilton's 8th-place finish at the Singapore Grand Prix was just scratching the surface. The real blow was not measured in points, but in the invisible fracture that opened between the pilot and his team. Because what happened at Marina Bay was not a racing accident, nor an isolated bad strategy. It was the symptom of a structure that, instead of protecting its pilot, exposed him. He was left alone in front of a machine that failed, and even worse, in front of a team that knew it and did nothing to prevent it. Ferrari now finds itself at a crossroads. The SF-25 problem can no longer be hidden behind classification results or diplomatic statements. It is no longer possible to pretend that the difference between Hamilton and Leclerc is just a matter of adaptation. The data, reports, incidents, and leaked radios have built an irrefutable technical case. There is a systemic flaw in the car's design that, if not corrected, will continue to affect not only performance, but internal morale and confidence in the project. What would you have done if you were in charge of the team? Would you have opted to redesign the SF-25 from scratch despite the costs and delays? Or would you have gone ahead as they did, trusting that the problem would not flare up so soon? And beyond the technical, Do you think Ferrari is really prepared, not only in resources but in mentality, to manage a project built around Lewis Hamilton? We want you to tell us. Leave it in the comments. Are you on the side of the pilot who demanded to be heard? Or on the side of the team that wanted to protect their original plan at all costs?